You know what, Dan? We started this new podcast called Positively Track, and I feel like we just started, and I realized we're already at episode 10.
Yeah, this has happened faster than I was expecting, and part of it is that we had those 3 episodes launch right at the beginning, but still, it's a bit of a milestone. I mean, it's not a huge milestone, but it's pretty cool that, 10 episodes. I wasn't expecting to get here this quickly.
I know, and because we've reached 10, this is a special episode, so William Shatner is joining us here on the show. No, he's not. I wish.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I don't know if I wish that or not. I don't know how he would. I know he doesn't do podcasts, but if he did come on the show to do a podcast, I don't know how that would go. I don't know if he would be into it or not, or he'd just be like, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like he would be tired of us pretty quickly.
I would say, Bill, can I call you Bill? Bill, let's talk about something totally different besides Star Trek. I really want to get to know you. And he'd be like, oh, Bruce, this is intriguing to me. And then, because they'd be talking about him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he'd like that.
I think so. You know, we'd bring up horses and his charity work, and yeah.
Exactly. That would actually be fun. I'm going to reach out to him anyway and ask.
Well, good luck with that.
See if he'll come on. Yeah. Anyway, so that's not what we're here to talk about. Oh, by the way, yeah, this is Positively Track, and my name is Bruce Gibson, if you haven't listened to the previous 9, and this is Dan Gunther.
Hello.
So there isn't a whole lot of news right now because everybody's sequestered at home. They can't go anywhere. We're all locked in our house, all this stuff, and so there isn't a whole lot going on in the news right now, at least in the Star Trek side of things. But we do know that Chris Pine is in talks to star in a reboot of The Saint.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember The Saint, not that I watched it, but I remember it being a TV show back, I think, in the 60s. Not that I was watching it in the 60s, but I'm saying reruns of it were on TV. But I never really watched it that much. I think maybe there had been another movie based on The Saint, but all of those are based on a book series. And the book series is written by Leslie Charteris, and it follows a character named Simon Templar. I mean, it's kind of this adventure, crime, drama, theft things going on. Again, I'm not that familiar with it. Have you ever watched the show or read the book, Stan?
I actually haven't. I've heard the name before, and I think I remember some advertisement for a movie or something at some point. I could be completely making that up out of my head, though. But I'm not familiar with The Saint at all, really.
Now, are you familiar with James Bond?
I am indeed, yes.
So The Saint is similar to James Bond. And in the TV series, the star of The Saint was Roger Moore.
Oh, okay.
Who later went on to play James Bond. So they're very similar characters.
Huh. That's not at all confusing.
So if Chris Pine ends up playing in The Saint, he could go on to be James Bond someday.
Yeah, I like that. He's been Jack Ryan. So, Jack Ryan, James Bond, and Simon Templar. I mean, that would be a pretty good trifecta.
This is one of the things that has made me start thinking about future Star Trek movie projects, because Chris Pine has moved on to other things. We have Noah Hawley directing, or signed on to direct, the next Star Trek movie. We don't have any more details besides that. We don't know when or whatever, but what I have heard, and maybe this is the rumor mill or whatever, I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but it would not feature Chris Pine, Zachary Quinto, so on and so forth, that cast that we've seen in the last 3 movies.
Mm-hmm. As far as what I've heard is he was asked in an interview, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but he basically said that he would like to do his own thing. It would be something different. And inferring from that, it sounds like it would not be the Kelvin Timeline characters, but we don't know what those characters would be, though.
I have to say I'm a little disappointed because I really do want to see this cast again.
Mm-hmm.
They're so good together.
It was never my favorite part of Star Trek, but the one thing I did really like was the casting and the interpretations of the characters. And right now we're reading a Kelvin Timeline novel featuring these characters, and picturing those actors in those roles is always a lot of fun. Especially, for example, Carl Urban as Dr. McCoy. I think he's brilliant in that role, and I would love to see that again. Zachary Quinto, Chris Pine, Zoe Saldana, Simon Pegg, all of them are really brilliant. And of course, we've lost Anton Yelchin, unfortunately, so he wouldn't play Chekhov again. But, still to see that remaining cast together again would be a lot of fun.
I'm just a little disappointed that it doesn't sound like that's going to happen. I mean, time has gone by quite a bit and everybody's moving on to other projects. It still could happen, but it doesn't sound like that's the direction of this new director. But we've seen directors come and go before the projects are done. So we've even heard Quentin Tarantino wanting to do a Star Trek movie. And he wanted to use that same cast, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't sound like that is going to happen. I mean, nothing's been confirmed, but I just get in the sense that's not happening.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like it. There have been conflicting interviews with him on this subject, which is really weird. So yeah, I have no idea what's going on that front right now.
So let's just pretend we're Noah Hawley. And here's the thing I really want to dig deep into. What would you do for the next Star Trek movie if you don't have this cast? So it's basically starting over again, right? Because the first 6 movies, we had the original series cast. Then we had 4 movies with the Next Generation cast. Now we've recast Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, Sulu, Chekhov, Scotty. We've recast them in 3 movies. If we're getting rid of that cast, where do you go for the 14th Star Trek movie? And keep in mind, you have to keep the box office happy. You have to get people to come to the cinema to watch this movie. So it can't just be something a Star Trek fan would want to see when the general public could really give a crap and not even know what we're talking about. For example, I don't know, maybe it's a movie about Harry Kim becoming a lieutenant. Like we would all go see that, but everybody else would be like, who's Harry Kim? Who's Harry Kim? Who would want to see? Who's Garrett Wang? That's the star. I've never heard of that guy.
Star Trek 14. It's about time.
And it's not a time travel story.
Yeah, I was just thinking that too.
So it really got me thinking, what could Noah Hawley possibly be thinking or doing that would appease Paramount and the cinemas and bringing the box office draw and money into another Star Trek movie, especially if you're not using that cast? Do you recast Kirk, Spock, and McCoy again that soon? I can't imagine that they'll do that.
Oh, man, it's a tough question. And, immediately my mind goes to, what would the general public care about? And I think, as sad as it is for me to say, it feels like the immediate impulse would be to go back to the Kirk, Spock, McCoy well, which I really hope is not the case. I don't want to see these characters recast yet again. I think there is a lot more room in the Star Trek universe for new and different stories that would be compelling and draw a box office. The problem is convincing a studio that that's the case, which is really scary, Yeah. Oh man. I've got to imagine that first impulse is to say, well, Star Trek is Kirk and Spock and McCoy, and we got to do something with them, sadly.
Yeah. And again, it would be really tough to do that with a whole new cast. I mean, it can be done, but like you said, it's a little too soon. I think some of the general audience would be a little confused.
Yeah. And I think the Star Trek audience, the fan audience, would be frustrated.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. So here's my thought, even relating to The Saint. So even though you and I aren't that familiar with The Saint, but we are familiar with James Bond. So let's just pretend we go either way. Yeah, what they do with The Saint is they cast Chris Pine. And they probably know that, yes, there are people who are familiar with The Saint, typically an older audience, but they know that they're going to market this movie more as a Chris Pine movie. So it's based on the star.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're creating a new Star Trek, and maybe you're doing with a whole new cast of characters, because they probably won't go to the Next Generation because we have Picard series going on right now. It'd be weird to have Patrick Stewart playing Picard in a new series and then recast Jean-Luc Picard in a movie at the same time. I think that would be a little weird.
Mm-hmm.
And Voyager and Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, they're not popular enough in the general public and pulp culture, I think, to attract an audience. I mean, maybe you could do something with Voyager. I think that was a little more well-known than the other two. But again, I don't think it's enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Paramount would go for that. And of course, Discovery's still on air and whatever, so I don't think they would branch off into a movie with Discovery. So that being said, if you're going to create a new cast of characters, maybe on a new starship or starbase or even at Starfleet Academy, I think they would lead the movie with a big-name celebrity.
That's an interesting thought. I like that. And, you know, to me, Star Trek has always been not a Kirk, Spock, McCoy thing, not even a Picard thing. It's been a setting for amazing stories, right? So, you know, to me, if they center it around a particular star or big name or something like that, you could do almost any kind of genre of movie around that. Like, you know, you mentioned Starfleet Academy. How about like a Star Trek movie in the style of Top Gun or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Or, you know, a crack team of pilots or starship commanders during the Romulan War or something like that, right? Like, it doesn't have to be the typical people on a starship exploring and getting into, I don't know, you know, it can be something completely different.
Yeah, and I think if you have the celebrity name attached to it, which I'm not that big into, it has to be a big name celebrity, but that seems how Hollywood works, and that's what attracts people to movies, of who's in it. And I mean, I'm just randomly picking somebody out. I'm not suggesting this person necessarily, but, you know, The Rock, Dwayne Johnson. You know, it could be like Starfleet Academy starring Dwayne Johnson, and people are like, oh, I want to see that movie because Dwayne Johnson's in it. Even though they're not big into Star Trek, they'll put somebody like that in it to bring the audience in. Or maybe it's, you know, like Chris Pratt or somebody like that, you know. They put into a Star Trek movie, and maybe they're not going through the academy. Maybe they're teaching the cadets, or maybe they are a captain of some other weird ship. I almost feel like they would have to go in that direction, because if they were actors that weren't that well known, and it's about characters in Star Trek that most people we've never seen before, it's not going to bring in the general audience. It'll bring us in. Like you're saying, I think of Star Trek in the same way as you do. But I think there's a lot of people out there that aren't that familiar with Star Trek, and they go, oh, yeah, that's the one with the guy with the pointed ears and the Enterprise going to... That's what they think of. And if you're like, yeah, well, it has nothing to do with those, they'd be like, well, what is it?
Yeah.
You know?
And that's one of the unfortunate things about Star Trek is you can't rely just on the fan base. You do have to bring in that general audience who, you know, is not as familiar, not as in love with Star Trek as we are, you know? So that is why you would bring in a big name like Star Trek, Starfleet Academy, starring Mary Steenburgen. No, wait, I don't know. Some big name star.
Yeah. Karen Gillan, Samuel L. Jackson in, you know, whatever. Then people are like, ooh, yeah, I want to go see that, you know?
Yeah. For the record, I've been recently watching Stargate SG-1, and Jack O'Neill, the main character, has a crush on Mary Steenburgen, which is why that's...
I wondered why you went there. I was like, that's interesting.
I don't know why. It just seemed like something funny.
Yeah, so I mean, I would think it would have to go that direction, or it has to be maybe a big event. And here's something that I would like to see, and I think it would work in the box office too, even if people aren't that familiar with Star Trek canon, and that would be the Romulan War. It's something that Star Trek fans keep wishing that we would see. We never got to it Enterprise. We were cut short on that. Yes, we've got some novels, but to have a movie about the Romulan Wars, of course, you're going to, or the Romulan War, you're going to think, oh, well, then we have to have Scott Bakula in there and, you know, Enterprise. You don't even have to go with them. You don't even have to go with the cast of Enterprise. As much as I would love to see that, I don't think they would go in that direction. Maybe they'd have Scott Bakula in the movie, but I don't think we would see the Enterprise NX-01. What I think they could do is focus on a different crew, a different ship during the Romulan War, and tell the story of the Romulan War, and even they could make reference to the Enterprise through it. And again, you could cast big stars in it. So you've got big stars in a Romulan War movie, and maybe, a a trilogy, that would be great.
Yeah, no, this has always been one kind of on my short list of things I would like to see. And so, yeah, I'd love to see a film or a series of films talking about the Romulan War. There was kind of a rumor going around a few years ago. I remember that they were talking about doing like a Romulan War type film talking about basically the beginning of the Federation kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what that was called, Star Trek Beginning or something like that. I'm totally can't remember what that is.
That kind of rings a bell now that you say that.
Yeah, and I feel like that would have been kind of in the vein of like a Top Gun, frontline warriors kind of thing. Very different than what we've seen in Star Trek before.
I always believe, though, at some time, and I don't think now is the time because Star Trek Picard is on the air, but at some time we will see a Next Generation movie with a new cast.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I want to see, but yeah, it's something that I've been like, well, when you've exhausted the original series vibe, that is kind of the next big thing that Star Trek's known for. And, Hollywood loves to do its, nostalgia reboot trips. So yeah, I've always thought we're going to see that someday, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't think anytime soon. I'm thinking, 10, 20, 30 years from now, like something far off. I don't even think 10 years, but well, possibly. But I think we've got some time because, I mean, even think of Patrick Stewart in the X-Men movie, and then we see a younger Professor Xavier that is played by another actor who I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head, but I apologize. I know everybody's screaming at me right now with his name.
Me too, but it's just eluding me. I know exactly who it is, but that guy.
That's because this is a Star Trek podcast, not an X-Men podcast. But again, you could do something that, the younger, earlier days of the Enterprise with the crew. Look, I see Dan struggling trying to come up with the guy's name.
It's right there on the tip of my brain. But oh well.
Well, again, we'll save that for other people. You can write into us and say, "Oh no, how can you get that wrong? It's so and so." It's like, okay, I'm sorry. This isn't that. But anyway, speaking of James McAvoy, James McAvoy.
Yep,
that's it.
James McAvoy.
Whew. Got my cred back. So yeah, I think a Next Generation recast would be interesting, but not now.
Yeah.
Not now.
No, it's not something that I'm eager to see at all, really, but if someday some executive realizes there is an audience for that though, and they can make a really interesting story, and yeah, sure, probably but right now I'm not interested in that at all.
Yeah, me either. Although what I would really like to see, and I don't think this would happen on the big screen, but maybe on the streaming services, do movies specific to that. And I would love to see a reunion of the Voyager cast together doing a Voyager movie or a small miniseries of Voyager back on Earth and what they've been dealing. Because we already know about 7 of 9.
Mm-hmm.
Like it could be in parallel to Star Trek Picard, where, we've seen 7 of 9 on Star Trek Picard, and then 7 of 9 spins off into this other movie or series with Kate Mulgrew and the rest of the cast and what they've been dealing with over the course of the last couple decades since they returned to Earth.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of potential for some interesting stories there and revisiting of some of those characters. Janeway, of course, we have seen she's an admiral after Voyager. We don't know if by the time of Picard, is she still in Starfleet? Is she still an admiral? Is she retired? Has something else happened? And then all of the other characters, Ensign Kim. Is he still an ensign? I'm sorry, Kim. Oh no, I'm sure you're at least Lieutenant Junior grade by then. So.
Wouldn't it be funny if we find something out, about Beverly Crusher, but through the Voyager series? We're not hearing anything on Picard right now, but all of a sudden we get to Voyager, like, oh, there's Beverly Crusher. Why is she showing up in the Voyager series? Oh, because she's married to Chakotay? What? No.
Yeah, that would be a little odd.
Anyway.
But yeah. Okay.
That would be. And then we find out later that Picard used to be married to Kess. And it really gets really strange.
Oh my God. No. No. That's a line too far. We've gone too far. You didn't take the time to ask if it should be done. You just wanted to see if it could be done.
Could it be done?
No, it can't.
This is why I'm not writing Star Trek, people. I take it way too far. Even Quentin Tarantino would say, even I wouldn't go that far.
I am firm in the belief, though, that like Star Trek has room for all kinds of different kinds of story. So one of my favorite book series I'm going to bring up is the Star Trek Vanguard series. And,
yes.
The setting is interesting. It's a starbase newly constructed out on the frontier, dealing with this kind of weird threat that's going on. But the underlying story is like this mystery, this strange happenings. And, I feel like that sort of story could work really well with Star Trek. Like, I don't know who the cast would be or what the setting would be, but, some sort of strange mystery that you have to follow to some sort of weird, amazing revelation at the end of the story. So, something like what we've seen in an episode of Next Generation, for example, The Chase, something like that. Maybe almost like a National Treasure set in the Star Trek universe or something, where you're just following all these clues and uncovering this strange mystery or something like that. And to be fair, I've never actually seen National Treasure, but that's what the impression I get. Nicolas Cage in a Star Trek movie. There we go.
Oh, I bet he would do it for sure.
I figured it out.
I'm glad you brought up Vanguard. I don't think they would adapt it, of course, but that kind of concept really gets me excited because we keep going to the well. We keep going back to that well in the movies of the starship with its captain, and it's the same characters and crew. We've got many, many times in different episodes in a TV series. It would really be fascinating, no pun intended to Spock, but it's like it would be really interesting to see something really go in a more creative direction and really get the audience bought into it. Because I think then the sandbox would really be open for them to do some really great things and not be so tied to canon because they're somewhere else. They're dealing with different characters, different situations, different aliens, whatever. It just takes place in the universe and it still goes along with that Roddenberry vision, but it's totally separate from all that other stuff. So you don't need to worry if Spock has a sister or not. You don't need to worry when McCoy met Kirk or whatever. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. It's like starting from the very beginning from scratch. And I love that concept. I love that idea.
Star Trek can go in so many different directions. And the way I think about it, for example, is, an episode of CSI doesn't have to worry about being in continuity with an episode of, I don't know, what's some other show?
NCIS. I don't know.
NCIS. And they're both set on Earth in the same country.
Right.
Star Trek takes place over a huge chunk of the galaxy. You can have people and situations and things that would never impact what's going on some other ship somewhere else. Like Star Trek can be so expansive, and yet we do keep focusing on these same situations, these same characters. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying you don't have to have these rigid boxes that you're having to write yourself into. I understand the desire to do that, to, tie to continuity and to bring in, the moments that have fans excited to revisit. But I really feel like Star Trek is big enough to hold more than that.
And do you think you could convince executives at Paramount to go with that? Would they buy into that?
I feel like if it was an exciting enough story, an interesting enough concept, I'd like to think, I know that's not what excitement for movies is built on these days, or at least it seems that way, but I still have to think that story matters at some point. Like if there's an exciting enough concept, an interesting enough hook, that you could just set it in the Star Trek universe and make use of the things that come with that and tell a really great story, I really hope somebody somewhere would be convinced of the validity of that.
And then you really get the executives, if you say, create this great creative story, interesting aspect, and then all of a sudden say, and I'm looking to have Scarlett Johansson play this character. Maybe we can get Adam Driver into this. And then then they go, ooh, that sounds really interesting. And we can really build from that. But here's another thing. Do you think now that Paramount and CBS are all in the one house of Viacom CBS, do you think they should tie a movie into, not directly, but somewhat indirectly, tie it into Discovery / Picard in some manner where there's a story element that kind of works through the different series that ties them in together?
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. Again, this kind of flies in the face of what I was just saying about Star Trek being big and not tied together. But, like...
You're building a franchise here, Jan.
Exactly. Now, the best example I can think of is I remember when Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country came out. And then shortly thereafter, there was the two-parter Unification with Spock in The Next Generation. And they directly referenced stuff in Star Trek VI. So Spock says he met Pardek at the Khitomer conference. And, that was like a big, like, ooh, it's all connected moment kind of thing. I can see those references. I can see that. You do want to, of course, market your film and television show to the people who are going to listen, and that's going to be the Star Trek viewers as well as the general public. You want to build that excitement. You want to have those things. So I would have no problem with it having some kind of link or some kind of reference, that kind of thing.
I would love to see that. I think it would make it really interesting if all of a sudden this new Star Trek stuff, there's these elements, this little thread that kind of connects them together in some manner.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it needs to be that way, but it would be kind of fun. It would be interesting to go that way. So I'm interested to see what Noah Hawley does. If Noah Hawley does anything. I'm so used to in this franchise and Star Wars and others where you hear these announcements. I mean, every time I hear an announcement for a director for a new Star Trek movie or Star Wars era, I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. We'll see. To me, I take it with a grain of salt until I hear they've said the word action, that they're in production. That's when I'm like, oh, this is actually happening now. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, we've gotten these rumors lately of like, they're planning a Star Trek Discovery movie. No one official is reporting that. So, that's taken with a huge truck full of salt. So, who knows what exactly is happening until somebody says action. I absolutely am with you on that for sure.
Well, just a few years ago when we were getting Discovery, they announced that we were getting a Khan series. And they announced we're getting a Starfleet Academy series, and we haven't heard anything about that ever since.
No, that's true. Absolutely. I think, the person behind the Khan series would have been Nicholas Meyer, and he's gone on record saying that apparently it's shelved and there's nothing happening with it. So
yeah, I think I heard him on a podcast like a year ago, and he said something like, "I haven't heard anything. I'm still waiting for the phone call and to figure this out. I don't know if it's ever going to happen."
Yeah, which is unfortunate, I think Star Trek has room for all these different projects. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I work for a company that does own a small movie studio of independent films, but I don't work on that side of the business, so I'm not that familiar with it. But it makes me wonder if there's a lot of business in Hollywood where there's an idea, there's a concept of maybe we'll be doing a Star Trek movie. Let's go ahead and sign someone. So in case we decide we're going that direction, we'll do it. But doesn't mean it's going to happen. We just want to secure it in case we decide to. And then that's when all the articles come out and the rumors, so-and-so has been signed to do, we're getting a new movie and directed by this person and starring this person. And the studio's probably like, we haven't decided if we're going to really do that or not. We just signed them in case we decided to do something.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Talk is cheap, as they say, right? Until there's, people paid and the craft services table set up and actors hitting their marks. It's just a rumor.
Yeah. But we don't spread rumors on this show. So if it's a rumor, we call it out that it's a rumor.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd love to hear anybody else's thoughts and feedback on this discussion. If you have any cool ideas for a movie or what direction you think Paramount should go in with movies. Should we even do movies for theaters anymore? Maybe we should just focus on CBS All Access and the other streaming services like we've been doing and just kind of stay in that arena. That way we don't have to maybe go into these more general audience type movies. We can do something a little more Trekky that appeals to us, you know? Anyway, thanks everyone for joining us. Dan, do you have any final things you want to say or where people can find you online?
Yeah, you can find me at Kertrats on Twitter. That's Kertrats. And you can, of course, find the show at Positively Trek on Twitter as well. So, yeah, like Bruce said, reach out to us. Let us know your Star Trek film ideas. And you can also email us positivelytrek@gmail.com if you want to send those directly to us as well.
Yes, and you can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex. It's Admiral, then the underline Rex. And, of course, listen to us on Literary Treks about Star Trek books and comics. And that's about it. So thanks, everyone, for joining us, and stay positive out there.
See you next week.